Hello and welcome back to the Thrive in Five podcast and to episode 6. We have managed one whole week, which I'm very proud of myself. And if you've made it to episode 6 and you've listened to all of them, congratulations, you've made it with me. I am recording this on Sunday evening, off the back of a lovely weekend that I spent with a friend. So I flew up on Friday morning from my home in Surrey, not actually from my home, that would be weird, but from Gatwick Airport, up to Glasgow to visit my oldest and best friend. So she is somebody who I've known since we were 11. We went to school together. We've been best friends ever since. So we've now known each other for 20 years, which we did realize this weekend and then freaked out a bit that we were that old to have known someone 20 years. It was lovely to see her. So she's a doctor. We don't get to see each other all that often with her shift pattern, particularly when I was working in a corporate job, it was almost impossible. But with me having a bit more flexibility in my work, doing this job and being able to work from pretty much anywhere, and her kind of maturing in her career as well and having more control over her shift patterns, we were able to find a weekend that worked. So I flew up on Friday. I spent the day working in Glasgow. It's actually one of my favorite cities. I love Glasgow. It's really interesting. It's nice and small. It's got lovely like bars and coffee shops and things. I spent a lovely day working in a very sunny, very cold Glasgow. And then spent the weekend with my best mate. So we went out for a lovely dinner. We went hiking on Saturday, out for a really nice long walk. We got a takeaway and watched a movie on Saturday night. I then flew home on Sunday morning. It was just lovely to spend sort of 48 hours with my best mate. And it was such a lovely weekend. And it was so nice to spend time, yes, with my best mate, but also away from my normality and away from work. Because something that I used to really struggle with was my identity outside of my job. If someone asked me to introduce myself back when I was working in my corporate job, a few years back, I would have said, my name is Amy and I work for Lloyds Banking Group. My name is Amy and I am a senior manager in X team. Like that would have been my defining feature, or how I thought about myself, how I identified. And it became a lot of who I was. I placed a lot of my self-worth in my career. When I got a promotion, it was because I was good, and it made me as a person feel like I was, better, that I was growing. And when I had a good day at work, that meant that I was great. When I had a bad day at work, it meant that I was bad, rather than I could never really separate myself from my job. I put a lot of my identity, a lot of my self-worth into how I did at work. And it became a lot of what I talked about as well. When I was socializing, often with work people, I worked for most of my career in quite intense teams where we spent a lot of time together, either on calls or in the office. And so we did socialize a lot together. It was almost a bit of like a coping mechanism, I think, when we were in quite intense teams, in quite intense situations. It's good to be able to unwind with those people as well. So I would socialize a lot with work people. And even when I wasn't with work people, I would talk about work. It became the only stories that I ever had to tell were about things that had happened at work. I placed a lot of my self-worth and a lot of my identity in my job. And part of that is completely understandable. I'd worked really hard to have the career that I had. I'd done my degree, I'd done my professional qualifications. I was building this career as part of the way that my career had always been talked about to me by mentors and things. It was this idea that it had to be something you were passionate about, and it had to be something that you really loved. And I was always looking for that thing at work that I loved, and I was chasing that. And so it became my identity because it was something that I'd had pushed on me for so long. But the problem was, it was actually really limiting. I reached a place where I realized I'd lost my sense of self, or who I was outside of work. I didn't really have any hobbies or interests outside of work. I would go to work, I would come home. Yeah, I'd watch a bit of TV, but it was always on the way to work or on the way home from work. At the weekend, would spend most of my sort of weekend either catching up on bits of work I'd missed, or doing like professional qualification work, or just sort of vegging in a slump, waiting for the week to start again, almost trying to recover from the week. I often spend my weekends eating and drinking a lot to kind of have that one moment of like freedom from work, and then I'm back into work. It became everything about me. I don't think I had much. I don't think if you'd asked people who knew me back then, they would have known much about me outside of what I did for work. And I'll be very honest and say that it was one of those things that was making weight loss harder for me, in that I was always using food as my one me thing. Like at the weekends, we would go out for meals and I would drink wine and eat a lot of food because it was the one thing I had, the one hobby I had outside of my job. And even at work, if I was in the office, getting my lunch at my lunch break was the one like me thing I had. Everything else was my job. Food became the only other bit of my identity. So yes, like not having identity outside of work made my weight loss hard, but it also just made my life a bit sad. Like I didn't have a lot of friends outside of work. I didn't do a lot of stuff outside of work that wasn't work related. Everything I did centered around my job. And I was going on holidays and stuff and stressing about work on the way to my holiday, stressing about work when I got back from holiday. I never really existed outside of the context of work until I reached a point where I had to. So I went through a period just before COVID, maybe a year before COVID, maybe a bit more than that, where my job was at risk in a restructure. So the business I was in was restructuring. And because of some complexities with that restructure, my job basically didn't get put at risk initially. And so I had this period of time where I wasn't sure if I had a job or not. And it was really hard for me because suddenly this thing that I had made my identity, that I had made a defining feature of who I was being ripped away from me. And I realized suddenly that I had given so much of my life to my organization, to the bank that I worked for. And I had allowed that to become so much of my personality and so much of what I talked about and what I identified with. But that actually one day that wouldn't be there, either because it would be taken away from me almost forcefully by a restructure, or because of one day I would leave a job, I would retire, I would have a life outside of work. And I realized in that period of time, it was very honestly very difficult for me mentally going through that restructure and not knowing if I had a job or not knowing where my place was, realizing that in reality, my organization didn't care about me as much as I cared about it. It made me realize that actually there was more to life than work. And it made me realize that I needed to have a life outside of work. And it's one of the reasons that I coach the way I do now. At the TFP, we believe that you are so much more than your email signature. There are so many coaching programs out there, and I see and I hear from women all the time who have worked with coaches that really put at the center of their coaching program helping you progress in your career, helping you to level up at work. And that's fab. Like if that's what you want, and absolutely fantastic. But for me, I know, having been through it myself, that success is about your life outside of work too. And at the TFP, we want to help women be incredible people with a great career, not somebody who is their career, not someone whose career sucks the joy out of them and leaves them a shell of themselves. I've done that in the past. It's really miserable and it's not fun. And actually, there is so much more to life than work. And it's why at the TFP, we really emphasize the things that happen across your week, across your life, not just things that happen at work. Work is going to be a big part of our lives because we have careers. Because in the modern era, when you have a career, that does take up a big chunk of the hours in your week. That's reality. And when you do a job that you care about and that you enjoy, it's natural that that job takes up a part of your mental headspace outside of work too. But it's not your only identity. And it's something that we really emphasize at the TFP because it's so important for your mental well-being, but it's also so important when it comes to your fat loss goals too. And that's why for me, this weekend was absolutely fantastic because as much as, we really emphasize this at the TFP, that you are more than your email signature, you have to practice that and you have to keep putting that into action. And it's something that I'm still working on since I've left the corporate world and started running my own business. My work is a big part of who I am. I've built a coaching business around what I needed back in the day. And it's a business I have a very deep emotional connection with, but it's not my identity. It's not everything about me. And so actually this weekend was me putting into practice exactly what I preach with my clients, hanging out with an old friend, talking about lots of stuff that had nothing to do with work, reminiscing about things that had happened, talking about people we know, gossiping quite a lot. It might not be the healthiest thing to do, but it's really enjoyable. Chatting about bits and bobs, talking about deep, meaningful relationship stuff and life stuff. And we talk about work sometimes. We have very different careers. She's a surgeon. I'm a coach. So when we do talk about work, it's not shop talk. It's, out of curiosity, I want to know things she's up to. I want to understand what's going on in her career so I can maybe give an outsider's perspective. She'll do the same thing for me. And it helps both of us to connect with being us again. We were talking at the end of the weekend on the way to the airport today about how actually it was really beneficial for us to spend some time with people who are in different spaces to us, who, know you outside of your career, who've known you for so long, and how much it helped both of us to kind of just reconnect with being us as people rather than being a doctor, a coach, a corporate woman, whatever it is. So it's something that I'm going to challenge you on a little bit this week. Who are you outside of work? If we met tomorrow and I shook your hand and introduced myself, I said, "Hi, I'm Amy. Who are you?" What would you say back? Who are you outside of your email signature? And what are you doing to go and be that person and go and spend time with that person? What hobbies do you have? What are you spending time doing? Do you do things outside of work? For example, something that I do, and I've been doing for a good few years now, is I have a singing lesson. I'm sure I'll talk about this more at some point. I have a singing lesson every week. And it's something that is unrelated to my job. It is completely unbeneficial to my job. I don't sing to clients. That would be weird. But it allows me to connect with a part of myself that is nothing to do with my job. So have a think. Who are you outside of work? Go and think about that and have an absolutely fantastic day. And I will speak to you tomorrow.